this is presented by Imagenomic. This is Essential Digital Workflow Concepts. And what we're going to work on today is we're going to kind of just go overview of some things that are really messing people up in their workflows out there. And this is put on by Imagenomic. A lot of you guys use their products. We've got the 3 plugins that Imagenomic produces out there. There's Portraiture, Noiseware, and Real Grain. Portraiture is one of the top sellers out there as far as anything to do with skin retouching. We've got a lot of people that use it. It does really nice job of retaining pore structure, and it does a good job of batch processing in Photoshop or in Lightroom. Then we have Noiseware. Noiseware's been around a while. It was the flagship product of Imagenomics, what started the company, and it's still holding its own with all the other up-and-comers out there. It's a plug-in. We also have a standalone for Windows. And then we have Real Grain, and Real Grain has some really cool toning, film, and grain effects to it. We're going to go over these a little bit later on, but right now we're just going to go right on into the part here talking about the workflow itself. And these are slides. We're going to start off with some slides and a narrated interaction. It's by me. Most of you guys have met me at the shows, or I've done sessions with you in support, and I'm the guy that does the support on there. I'm George. And it's going to be kind of a synopsis of what we're talking about covering in the future with webinars. We're going to go through some things here and kind of show you what kind of a mess the industry's in and how we're going to be able to try to help you out. And then we're going to go in the second half and go into some tips and tricks on portraiture and some things that will help you use it in your workflow. Now, we're going to start out here with some questions that are asked by customers, because we're kind of setting the pace here, what's going to happen later on. Now, these questions are based on customer feedback that we get from, sales of the products, the shows that we do, like Photokina, WPPI, Imaging USA, all these guys out there, and also my experience for the past 30-plus years in the imaging and digital industry of dealing with photographers, because I'm a master photographer myself. And so the number one question that we get out there from people pretty much is, what's the best computer hardware for pro photographers to use? Now, we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. That's the number one question we get. What's the best computer hardware for pro photographers? Number two, what is the best software, Photoshop or Lightroom? Because pretty much that's kind of what you're stuck with. There's some other stuff out there, but these are the two big guys. Number three, how can I shoot better images? All right, we're going to go into that. Number four, how can I edit images better? Now, this is probably where most of you guys spend your time, is sitting in front of that computer editing images. And then number five, how can I spend less time in front of my computer? Now, we're going to talk a little bit about hardware here, okay, and cameras. We're going to specifically talk a little bit about cameras. And there's a tremendous amount of confusion out there over sensor size and megapixel ratings. Now, the first thing most people think of, especially newer photographers, is that if I buy the newest camera with the biggest sensor, I'm going to get better pictures. No, I don't quite work that way. This will be a subject of one whole series of webinars right by themselves. There's a lot of third-party gimmicks out there for your cameras. One of the most prevalent ones out there you've probably seen is some of these things that look like Tupperware, and they're supposedly to be able to magically wrap light around you in some type of a lighting environment. And then you've got this thing where people think that you really need these really super high-end cameras or flash systems to achieve high-quality output. Well, if that's the case, then the majority of photographers out there, for ever since photography has been around, just their work's really been junk because they didn't have this kind of stuff out there. And one of the things that relates to the camera itself is there's a tremendous amount of time wasted doing unnecessary edits in your workflow based on in-camera settings, okay? We will have a whole series that's going to just deal with that as well. Our next thing here, we're going to talk about systems, okay, computer systems. Now, I can tell you from a fact, the majority of the people that come into our support ticket system have underpowered systems. We can just look at their 4 gig, maybe 8 gig, even 8 gigs underpowered today. And there's a lot of problems and a lot of issues that happen because the systems are underpowered. We're going to go into pretty good in-depth explanation of that later in later webinars. And another common misconception is a Mac is better for image editing. Now, I've got Macs and I've got PCs. I was using Apple back with Apple IIe's when they first come out. And I had one of the first ones that come out there, 8-bit. I used to code on them. I used to do service for Apple. I use Apple and I use Windows-based systems every day in my business. I have to know how they both work. I know them inside and out. The thing is, a lot of photographers think a Mac is better for some reason that nobody's ever been able to tell me. It's not. A Mac is a personal computer, and a Windows-based system is a personal computer. There's one is not better than the other one. Another thing that happens out there is that few people calibrate their monitors, okay? Or if they do calibrate them, they don't calibrate them properly. You may just run through the software in auto mode, and you don't realize there's a lot of little factors involved with the ambient lighting and how you're viewing that monitor and the type of monitor it is and all that can really make a difference on how that monitor is calibrated properly. Again, that's a whole entity in itself. And then most workstation setups, by workstation setups, I mean you're sitting in front of your computer in a chair. You got a keyboard, and you got a mouse, you got a screen there in front of you. Most of them are repetitive stress syndrome nightmares. Repetitive stress is anytime you have to make any movements, same kind of movements over and over again. Click the mouse, move the mouse, click the mouse, move the mouse, move the keyboard, click the mouse, move the mouse, over and over, all day long. You end up at the end of the day with neck pains, arms hurting you, all kind of stuff in there. Some of you end up having to get braces on. I know I've been, over 60 years old. I have this issue with carpal tunnel that keeps coming back to haunt me from time to time when I start getting slack in how I'm sitting at my workstations. We're going to talk a little bit about the software, Photoshop and Lightroom. Most people use Photoshop or Lightroom for basic color corrections. That's what they use it for. They don't get into all the in-depth stuff that's in there. It's maybe 2% of the features of either product is being used out there. That's the way most people use it. Now, in a decent workflow, by decent I mean something that's a little better than what most people are using out there now, color correction often isn't even necessary. And the reason to say that is there's a lot of time that's wasted on doing unnecessary edits in the workflow. When you go out and shoot with your camera and you don't really understand all that concept of capturing light at the beginning, what the camera's doing, white balance and so forth, as you go forward, you find that you're having to edit a lot of these things to try to get something that you could have done back there in the capture process itself. And then something here a lot of people don't realize, Photoshop and Lightroom can basically only do 3 things to a pixel on the screen. The only 3 things it can do is it can adjust the hue, the saturation, and the lightness of that pixel. Photoshop or Lightroom can't sharpen a pixel, it can't contrast a pixel, it can't make that pixel HDR. It can only adjust the hue, saturation, and lightness, just like any other program does. So once that is you realize that's what's going on, all these little techniques and things these people are doing out there, you realize it's all based on just 3 things. Now, a lot of you guys have actions and plugins. You got our plugins. We got some free actions up there. There's a lot of companies out there that sell actions, and all, and there's a lot of big hype out there. And that a lot of you buy actions to make your workflow easier. You buy it so that you want to get one click. You see that cool little baby in the field, and it's got that really neat soft baby in the field action that they used on it, and it just looks cool. So you buy it, you like it, and it works on there. And there's a place for that. There's a place in the workflow for things like that. Thing is, a lot of the actions out there, if you've been in Photoshop since version 2, and you look at a lot of these actions, you realize that a lot of them have been out there forever, and if people get a hold of them, some of these people just add a couple of steps, or they make it real complex looking with a lot of things they do to it, and they rename it with something, and they try to make it look different, and they ended up just getting it off of Action Central, maybe even Adobe Exchange out there. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't realize about plugins and actions, that they can be very, very data destructive. I'm going to show you a little bit later on in Photoshop what I mean about data destructive, but what I mean is that the data that comes in and then the data that goes out, there's a lot of it missing. If you run action, there's a lot of actions out there very data destructive. There's also a lot of plugins that do that. That's one thing Imagenomic strives in their plugins is they're professional level plugins. They're written in C++ and they're very high level as far as trying to keep pristine data. There's no way in the world you're going to keep everything that comes in and goes out if you use any kind of plug-in or action on there, but there's a lot of them out there that are very data destructive, and I'll show you what data destruction is later. Also, complex actions that you guys use. Sometimes you'll see an action and it'll come up and it'll have a bunch of steps there, and they'll say, okay, this step you got to adjust the amount here to get it to look like this in the next step, or you got to adjust the opacity here, or you got to adjust something to do something. Well, you don't really know what it's going to do until you get through with it. It's not like a plug-in. A plug-in is going to come up and it's going to show you right there. You move the slider immediately, the effect comes up in the preview. An action doesn't work that way. Action is just a set of recorded steps in Photoshop. So when that action is running, a lot of times when you get down to the end, your only way of doing something, making it less or making it different, is to do an adjustment layer change on there or do an opacity change on there. And the kind of the way that I look at stuff like that, it's like painting your house and then you want to take off some of the paint on there because you want this rustic look over just under the shutters on there. Now, we're going to talk about the workflow a little bit here. We're going to divide the workflow up into 4 main areas. Now, it can be divided up into hundreds of areas, but we're going to go into 4 main areas on it. And the 4 main areas are, number 1, capture, and that's the process that surrounds capturing an image. That's the composition, that's the lighting, that's the type of camera you have. That's everything that you have in that capture process, the pose, everything that's going on there that has anything to do with when you press that shutter and that image is coming in that lens on that sensor. Number 2 is the editing process. That's where most of you spend your time. That's where you spend an inordinate amount of time on there is making changes to image data, color changes, white balance, cropping, retouching, and so forth. Number 3 is output. Okay, output is when it goes out to the web, goes to print, or some of you maybe even go to service bureaus. We've got a lot of customers that have stuff that they send out to the service bureaus for resale. And then number 4 is the archiving process, and that's creating backups of image catalogs and images. Now, by image catalogs, I mean if you use Lightroom, you should really back up those catalogs on there. Don't rely on Lightroom because it just makes a backup of itself. It's not making it off somewhere else on there. And we'll break the workflow down into real brief analysis of each process. The capture process itself is the single most important part of the imaging workflow. I hear a lot from people over the years as I've taught photography, imaging, retouching, online images. People say, well, I don't need to do this. I'll get it right in the camera. Well, even when you shot film, if some of you guys like me shot film, you know there's really no such thing as right in the camera. You try to get it as close as you possibly can, but you always had to do something. The negative had to be developed fat or thin, or there's something had to go on there a little bit. In digital, you've got the advantage of being able to look at the screen and doing some stuff on there, but you don't really understand that when you have an image on the back of that screen, what it looks like on that Facebook page or what it looks like on a print can be night and day difference of what you see on the back of that screen. This capture process is I can't say it enough, the most overlooked part of a workflow. Most people go out, buy a new camera, they'll shoot natural light, they'll bring it in, and then they have to start doing all the work. And the majority of shooters out there, and I say majority of shooters, people that have come into the digital industry out there in the imaging world, that they don't know that much about their cameras or lighting. Now, basing that on, as I've got a background in old film, and I've also got a background in cinematography, so lighting and how the actual cameras and equipment worked, you had to really know because you didn't have that little screen on the back you could look at. You either had a Polaroid that you could do, or else you just pretty much knew your lighting and how you metered and how your particular film shot that particular lens with that particular lighting, and then how your lab could develop it on a particular type of paper. So most people don't realize those things now. They kind of, they just say, well, I'm going to let the technology take care of that. And I say this, the reason I say this little thing here about, the reason that most people shoot natural light simply because they're scared of using flash. When I do sessions with people or workshops or something, and I go on and I say, let me guess you shoot natural light. And they go, yeah, how can you tell? I say, well, you got coon eyes there, you've got people squinting, you've got a lot of things that show you're shooting natural light. And then I ask them why, and almost everybody says, well, I tried flash, it just looked fake on there. Well, that's another thing we're going to talk about is that, in that capture process, you can use flash and people won't even realize that you did it. And then this non-destructive editing starts in their capture process. If you've heard Adobe tout Lightroom, that's their big thing is non-destructive editing, okay? So that's where it starts at. The closer you can get it to some type of a decent exposure you can work with, the better off you are down the road down there. Now, in the second step, the editing process itself, most people don't link shooting and culling. And by that is, you should shoot in a sequence of images. Just say you got a little baby out there and that little girl, blue-eyed girl in that field of flowers. You may shoot some close-up head and shoulder shots. You may pull back. You may shoot some kind of odd angles on her. But you always try to shoot those things in a sequence. So when you cull them, you can go through there and you can compare like images to each other and cull them very quickly. Also, a lot of people have a tendency to try to get the images out the door real quick and do these boilerplate proofs out there and show people. And out there with the digital imaging world the way it is, you should be able to show that person an end result as fast as computers are and as fast as the process is. That's really no problem. And there's also one single setting in the camera that can infect the entire editing process, because that's what we're talking about, editing process. That single setting is your white balance. Again, that will be discussed in great depth and why most people don't realize how important white balance is. Also, go back to that RSS and ergonomics and all, understanding and utilizing proper workstation ergonomics. We're in the editing process. We're sitting in front of the computer. We're getting tired. We're getting down toward that last 100 images in that wedding. Oh, man, we just want to get them out the door, right? Well, that's where the quality starts failing. That's where, And if you just keep doing this over and over, it's going to really kill you. Quality goes down with fatigue, comes up in pain and so forth. And then we're going to talk about utilizing the RAW workflow as opposed to a JPEG. And we're not going to say, oh, you can't shoot JPEG, you can only shoot RAW, or JPEG is just as good as RAW. We'll show you the differences in them and show you why in some cases you can just get by with a JPEG and why you really need to shoot that RAW in some cases. Now the third part, the output process. Now understanding the link between your edits and your output. A lot of people go and just kill themselves trying to do some kind of edit on an image and then turn around and stick it up on Facebook. So really, if you've gone to any kind of a high-end art gallery or to a show with this high-end prints here and you look at some of the prints, you go, wow, I wish I could do it like they do it. Well, one of the main reasons is because that image that they edited was edited toward that specific print size, the paper type, the type of inks they were using, if it was a wet process, the process they were using, the viewing distance, as well as the lighting it was going to be viewed with. So there's a lot of things there. Sometimes it's nitpicking, but it can make the difference between having outstanding images and just like everybody else has. Also, knowing how your printer processes the images you send them, using White House, CPQ, whatever the guys are out there that you're going to be using. They'll tell you, well, we got sRGB printers. There is no such thing as an sRGB printer. Okay, folks, I'm telling you like it is. If you send them an sRGB image, they have to convert it with whatever software they're using to work on whatever printer they're using to be able to print it on the paper they're using. They don't just dump it straight to the printer. It has to be converted to a working color space that image, that particular printing process uses on there. Doesn't matter whether you're using color correction turned on or color correction turned off on there. This is a thing that we discuss in great depth about how you can actually monitor what your printer is doing and see, there's just simple print that you can send out to the printer in each batch in there and let them print, and then you can use it as your basis for how those prints are actually coming back to you. Also, utilizing batch processing in a streamlined manner. When do you do batch processing? Okay, and what do you batch process? Are you just batch processing Photoshop, with some actions on there that just go through and do some skin retouching, or are you trying to batch process a lot of your workflow? We'll go into some real in-depth features about how to do that. And then it kind of goes back up to that beginning there, understand the link between your edits and your output. This one here, realizing the edits you made for the 8x10 print don't look the same on Facebook. Now you have to understand why, because the images are being recompressed and they're being resized and all that for these social networking places on there. And they all have their algorithms and every way they do that. So it's just not going to look the same. So you can sit there and kill yourself for an 8x10 print and then put up on Facebook, and you just kind of wasted your time, or vice versa. You could do something on Facebook, it's going to look okay, but then when you do the 8x10 print, it's going to look like garbage. The last part in the output process, controlling metadata and making it work for you. Just put that in there because there's some of you, metadata is very important too. Metadata just means data about data. So what that means is that it's data about what that image is and what's in it, and the capture process and all is kind of hidden in there in some data. And Lightroom and Photoshop and all that, they keep it in there, allow you to look at it, and then you can actually use it for doing various things about image positionings, global positioning, and looking at your camera, getting serial numbers off on batch process, and there's a lot of things you can do with metadata. The archive process, the last thing here, okay? Now, archiving should be done as close to the capture process as possible. I am a victim of going out, shooting a wedding, come back in, dumped everything over to one hard drive, went out and grabbed the compact flash cards, run back out and shot another wedding the same day. You imagine that. Come back, and that hard drive had gone. I sent it off to Western Digital to get it recovered. They couldn't even recover it. Fortunately, I had pulled the images into Lightroom and let it build previews, full-size previews, so I did have those previews to go back on. So I wasn't totally dead, but I relied on that one method of archiving there. So that's why I say here, more than one method of archiving should be utilized. That's on backup. Don't rely on hard drives. Hard drives nowadays are awful. They used to give you 3-year warranties on consumers and 5 years on enterprise. Now it's 3 years on enterprise, which is business, and 1 year on consumer. Don't rely on those hard drives. They will fail you. Now, know exactly how that online storage, archive software, or store your data needed. That's if you're using like iCloud or some type of cloud storage. Some of them can really get you on the amount of data that goes up and how you get it back down and how long it's going to take and how much they're going to charge you for it. And also realize that some of these cloud methods up there have proprietary methods of archiving on there. And also make sure your metadata survives the archiving process, because sometimes you send images up and you don't realize you're stripping your metadata out of there, and then you come back and you realize, oh man, all those JPEGs I sent up there now, I don't know anything about them. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over here to Mr. Photoshop CS5, and I'm going to show you a few things. I'm sorry, CS6. See, they all look the same, don't they? All right. So we got Photoshop CS6 here, and I'm going to show you the plugins. They're starting out with portraiture. Okay. Well, on the left-hand side here, guys, is before, and on the right-hand side is after with portraiture. Now, of course, a lot of you are thinking, oh yeah, right. You know, I mean, you could go in there and do anything you want on this image and fake this out. Well, here's the before image over here. Now you see the little hair there that's going on, little small hair in the eye right there. There it is. You see over here on this side, we got the little small hair on the eye over there. We look at the image here. We'll look at it here. There's before, left, after on the right. And as you can see, the image is not any different. It actually looks sharper here on this side. So what we're going to do, just to show you we're not fooling with you, we're going to go run that filter there, Imagenomic portraiture. I've got hotkeys there. I've got it also maximized on it. And I right-click on there and bring up 100% view. There's no sense in going any further than that. And as you can see, what is so cool, there it is. That's the image. That's it. There's the settings I've got up here for the image. One reason that people have this thing about, you know, having to go back and pull some of the image back is because they just don't know how to use the software or they're not using it properly. So these settings here I recommend to people: fine -20, medium 0, large +20, and threshold. Threshold is what controls the amount. If I turn threshold off, it turns off the whole process. The farther over I get it, the more of the skin smoothing. It does not blur the image. That's one thing you hear people say in Photoshop, I can do anything you do in portraiture. No, you can't, not unless you're doing pixel level editing. This software is written in C++. It's an external process completely away from Photoshop. It has nothing to do with Photoshop. It doesn't blur skin if used properly. All it does is enhance contrast on skin. Okay? So if you've got these settings, fine -20, medium 0, large 20, threshold to suit, and put your portrait size, always use large on it, because the camera sensors nowadays, you'd be better off using large on it. Don't even worry about auto detector. They just set it on large. Now, what you're going to notice is so cool about this, I'm going to turn off the skin tones mask. Now, but most people would immediately say, oh, as soon as you turn the skin tones mask off, all those eye detail and everything's going to disappear. Whoop, I just turned it off. As you can see, off, it's the same. But what happened here is what's really cool about it, and this is one of the things I do when I'm teaching retouching. When most people retouch, they forget about the hair, and especially with the girls, they spend a lot of money on the hair. If you look at this before image over here, you see the real heavy contrast in between it. You look at the hair over here, and it has a kind of smoky, hey, that's a new one there, a kind of a smooth, silky look to it. This one's harder. This one's smoother, more of a Pantene look to it, okay? But at the same time, all the detail of the hair is there. So when I'm telling people, when they're doing head and shoulder shots, especially of the girls, okay, turn off the skin tones mask. It's going to blur the background a little bit, but in most cases on head and shoulder shots, if you're shooting anything, you don't want a bunch of detail in the background anyway, because it's a head and shoulders, it's a portrait shot, okay? So when we're doing this, before and after, skin tones off, everything down here is pretty much set to the default settings there. Except sharpness, I got it turned up a little bit. It does a real good job of sharpening without going overboard on it. So as you can see, it does a good job. It doesn't blur the eyes or the detail of the eyes, so you got to go back out there and use that transparency mask. We put that there for people that have images that they're doing multiple layers on. We have a lot of professionals that have multiple layers on that. Okay, so show you that. That's portraiture. Now we're going to bring an image in over here, soft screen. I got two screens running because I got so much stuff there going on. I have to keep up with two screens. And what we got here is we got Mr. Robin, shot him out in the backyard out there. Canon, I can't remember what it was, 30D maybe, with a 200mm f1.8. And I just kind of sharpened it up a little bit, and I popped the color just a tiny bit, but all the background blur and all that's all in, straight out of the camera, just with a little bit of saturation and a little bit of sharpness done. It's kind of a little hyper sharp, and the reason is because I was going to print this at 11/17, and we take it to the show, we show people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Noiseware, Filter, Imagenomic, Noiseware. I've got a hotkey there for it, Control-K. Open it in full screen because we don't want any of the outside parts of the process to intrude into our editing workspace. And I'm just going to come here and set it to default settings. Okay, now at default settings, you notice it does a pretty darn good job. You can see all that color noise is prevalent in there. You can still see all the edge detail is still in the image there. And what I did is I created a little preset. I wanted it to be a little bit finer in there, so I created a little preset. I call it Robin Webinar. And what that does is that gives it a little bit more edge contrast, and it gives it a little bit more color reduction on there. And just to show it for the screen, because it's a little harder to see on screen. If I print this image out, even in default, it's going to look really good. 11 by 17 canvas, it just looks beautiful. Okay, no issues whatsoever. If there's one thing I want to tell you about using this software, it doesn't matter whether you're using this or what you're using. When you're doing noise reduction, the single worst thing you can do is come in here and start doing this. Pixel peeping. Coming in here and looking at this image and going, oh, look, there's some noise there. There's some more noise. I got to get rid of it. I got to get rid of it. Don't do that. Never, ever go past 100%. Sometimes you may have to look at something, some kind of detail somewhere, but don't do it, because everything past 100% is artificially generated. It's going to be pixelated, okay? So you don't need to go past that. Ideally, you want it to be able to, at the 11 by 17 out there on my big monitor, this is what it will look like as opposed to this. You see some of the edgy, scratchy stuff in there, and I can actually pull, that's nice, I can actually pull it up. That would be about right there is what the print would actually look like into a comparison ratio on here. So you can see all the edgy stuff in the background, it's all gone there, but I still have all the detail of that image available there. So, and when you're using this, default is a good starting point. Don't go crazy with trying to come in here and mess around with pixel peeping. You will do nothing but drive yourself up the wall and get your family mad at you. Okay? There's the after, and there's the before. As you can see, it does a really good job. Now, I'm going to buzz over here, and I'm going to pull up an image here. But what we're going to do is we're going to flip it back to just the out of the camera crop on it. Canon 5D Mark II 200 millimeter f1.8 with one 580 EX2 sitting off to the right with a little battery pack on it and one little LumaQuest softbox on it. So what we're going to do here now is we're going to show you real grain right here. Now, real grain, I had it open up here on the other screen over here because I was using it over there. So let me get it over here. Real grain's kind of cool. Real grain is a piece of software that when you first look at it, you go, God, it doesn't make any sense on there. There's a lot of stuff going on. I don't really understand it and all. But we were doing this back before Lightroom was doing it. So we've got the ability to work on shadows, midtones, and highlights, which are the main three areas. They broke it out a little bit further in Lightroom now in ACR. They've got 4 areas you can work on. And we've also had these nice little color controls here, hue, saturation, brightness. Remember I told you hue, saturation, brightness, hue, saturation, lightness. That's what we're talking about. The reason they're all grayed out, by the way, is because I have black and white turned on here. And then if I turn on black and white, we have the ability to add color lens filter on top of it, plus control all of the aspects here. Now, this one's got a preset on there that I've got. It's what's really cool about this software is we've got 4D slots in here for presets. And if you've ever used Lightroom and tried to scroll down through presets, you know it's impossible to do. Here, you can either use the arrow keys on the keyboard, or if you got a mouse with a wheel on it, you can just move that mouse down like I'm doing now, and these presets come up. Now, some of them are edgy, some of them are hard because they're kind of generic presets I've got there. I may even end up selling a whole group of presets I've got for Lightroom, Photoshop, and stuff like this later on in the future. But this is just really a nice way of having some really cool effects out there. And again, the data destructive process I'm going to show you about in a few minutes doesn't hardly exist with this type of a process here. We've also got a bunch of presets in here. We've got some color films that some of you guys may have remembered out there that you can't really get anymore. There's your basic, and then we've got some cross-processing out there, different processes from one to the other. So if you click on a cross-process out there, it'll cross-process. Sometimes it's going to look goofy, sometimes it's going to look cool. You've got the different types of film out there and the various effects that it does on them. And when you look at them, just say we take a film here. Let's go to a black and white film because it's more prevalent. We'll show you here. And we'll pull up like a Ilford and then a 400. And we look on that, we notice it has that kind of little edgy grain in there that you would look on something like that. If you go up into a little bit higher up in there, like a 3200, you notice your grain comes in there even more prevalent, but it still has that cool, soft film-like. If you shot higher ASA films, you always had that kind of, you could see that, the silver effect in there. You could see that little kind of blotchiness it was really cool. Of course, if we back out here a little bit the process will get less and the farther we back out. But the software has a tremendous amount of power to it. I mean, a tremendous amount of power to it. We got a demo up there, a tutorial that goes in there and shows how it works and all that. But we're going to go into some areas of actually using the software synergistically. In other words, using them all together. And one of the things I like to do is I like to take noiseware, and especially if you're shooting weddings, you sometimes you have to crank your ISO up. I use noiseware just to remove color noise, real light color noise from bride close-ups and and the girl close-ups and all. And then I use portraiture on there to smooth the skin out a little bit. And then I turn around and with a mask on it that I made with portraiture, I take and I put a little bit of a grain effect on it. And it kind of, because a lot of the higher ISO stuff, you always kind of lose a little bit of the detail because you're shooting higher ISO. So I use a sharper grain and throw it in there, and it makes it look like it's actually sharper and like it was even shot at 100 ISO. So there's some cool ways of using the software together, using noiseware, portraiture, and real grain together to get some really good effects. And of course, one of the things that people always ask us about this is that, where do you use these plugins? Okay, I've got Photoshop. Where do I use it? Do I use it? Where in my workflow? When I open my image up, what am I doing? Well, I want to try to do it as close to the capture process as possible. And you may have to do a little bit of color correction. You may have to go and get rid of some really nasty scars or zits or something that the software's not going to just pull out automatically, and do that a little bit, and then come in and run portraiture on there. If you want to use noiseware, though, try to use it very first thing that you do before you do any type of levels or curves, boosts, or any kind of brightening, because when you start brightening an image, it's underexposed, and there the noise is going to start popping out, especially in the shadow areas. So any of the plugins, try to use them as close to the process as you can, but with the exception of when you're doing real grain is more of a creative type of a plugin, so you may do some things to it with like portraiture and then noiseware and then maybe another action or something, and then you can run real grain as a finishing process to kind of give it that cool, edgy look that you created yourself, because you can create your own looks in there and save them out with no problem. So again, try to use them as close to the process as you possibly can. But what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to switch over to that Mr. Lightroom guy here, and we're going to take a look at what Lightroom's doing here. And here's that image we just had opened up over there, and or one of them. We got so many of them going on here because I've been working with presets and things like that. And the way that the portraiture, we don't have noiseware in Lightroom right now. We've got portraiture, and the way it works is you right-click on the image, you come up and you have Edit in Imagenomic Portraiture. Now, when it comes up, there'll be a window that'll pop up here, and it'll ask you if you want to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. It'll ask you if you want to edit a copy or edit original. So basically what that means is that if you say original, it's going to, whatever that image you have there is going to pop up into portraiture. If you say edit a copy, it's going to create a copy of the original file, and it's going to work on that. But if you say edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments, if you've made any adjustments to it, it'll throw those adjustments out with the TIFF file it makes. Now, unfortunately, we have to create a TIFF file, which Lightroom's creating the TIFF file. For portraiture to work, we have to work on a TIFF file. You see it created the file up there, and I had it opened up over here in the other screen, so we're going to put it back over here. And it opens up, it looks just like portraiture does over in Photoshop. The only difference is that you're not going to have the ability to create a mask here. And if you have more than one image open in, if you've edited and selected more than one image in Lightroom and you brought it up in here, you'll have a queue here that will show up. Okay? I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on that because that's pretty cut and dried, and that's also presented in our online video tutorial about how Lightroom works. The other way of doing it is do an export process. So you select, just say you select 3 images here, 3 or 4 images, you right-click on them, you go export, and then export. We go up here, and it's going to bring up the export dialog. Again, I've been working on that other monitor over there. And in the export dialog, we have a plug-in that plugs right in there to it. It's part of the export process on there, so you can select it, and it'll automatically fill in all the blanks here about how portraiture interacts with the export process. Generically, what it does is that if you want to use a preset on there, you've got all the generic presets that are canned that are built into it. They're all listed right here. You can see, you recognize those. Most of you guys use default. And then you've got any presets that you created in there, okay? And as you go through there, there's a bunch that I've created here for testing and one thing and another, but they're all there. Any kind of preset you do is going to be available in both the Photoshop version and the Lightroom. It shares the same exact files on there. Now, what you can also select is once you select a preset, just say you select a preset, and then I've got a little name there, what that was for. If you want to hide the portraiture window, in other words, you want it to batch process without coming up and asking you to do something to the image, you just click on Hide Portraiture Window there. And then you come on down and you can tell it where you want to put the images at. Most of the time I recommend to put them in a subfolder of your original image and then call it something that you know what it's going to be. Like these are your final JPEG outputs to print or to whatever, you know. And then if you want to be able to view them once they're due, you've got to add them to that catalog, because if you don't, you'd have to import them back in there. So if you say add to the catalog, it will bring them back over into Lightroom, and you will be able to see them, and they will be in this folder right here inside of your tree over here. If you want to rename them, you can call them whatever you want. Again, a lot of this stuff we're not going to get into real big time there because it's all pretty much cut and dry. We cover that in the video itself, but this does give the ability to finalize and get the images out the door. So if you have a bunch of images there and you say you want to export them all out to a folder, then you want to send that folder off to print, the export is where you do it at. Okay? And once somebody shows you common sense aspects of these workflows and how lighting works and how your camera works, all of a sudden you go, duh, I wish I'd have known that before. And some of you guys that are spending 40 or 50 hours a week editing, some of you 70 or 80, all of a sudden your workflows go down to half. Now, I don't expect you to go out and start shooting more. I want you to spend more time with your family or having a good time or whatever. That's the whole purpose of it. But it's going to make you, overall, you'll have better quality. You'll have a more streamlined workflow. And then you'll also have more time to be more creative. Because, guys, I can't emphasize this enough. You are not competing, in most cases, out there. The majority of our customers are not competing against other professional photographers. They are competing against technology. I can't stress that enough. Technology allows you to come in here and do these things that you couldn't do 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. And as the last thing I'm going to show you here real quick, I promise you this about levels here, okay, and curves and so forth on this thing. This is a histogram down here in the corner, and I'm going to bring it up here so you can get a little bit of a look on it, and I'm going to expand the histogram out into all the channels. And what we got here is a histogram. You notice it come out of over in real grain. The histogram looks pretty cool, okay? All right? Let me update the histogram. That's where a lot of these guys fool you. They don't update that histogram. You notice there was a little exclamation point up there in the triangle. That means it was using cache data. Updated. That's what the data you're looking at right there, okay? We just ran real grain on that, if you remember. We come back over here. Here's the original one. There's that little cache data thing there. It says click for histogram with uncached data, which means the real data. If I click on it, you'll notice that there, you know, we've got some shadows and all that. That's where most everything is at. And we don't see much tail going on there. We got a little bit of push white that's kind of coming up here. Now I ran real grain on it, and I've got a history panel on the side that's showing what's happening over here. I've just got it off onto a different monitor so it stays out of the way. I run real grain on it. Update that histogram there, okay? And you notice nice, smooth, even look to it. Well, let's just say that we're going to run some levels on there, which a lot of the actions will do. And first thing a lot of them will do is they'll pull that black point in to about 10 because they'll say, oh, you can't print anything below 10. And then they'll pull that white point in to about 245. They say, because, you know, your paper really is what your white is. You can't do any pure white, so we're going to pull it in about 245. And then they say, well, now I kind of lost a little bit of the midtones, and I've got to bump them up a little bit, so I just moved my midtones back a little bit to kind of even it out there, okay? So if we show the preview, you'll see there. We've got a little bit more punch to it. So we click OK, and you look at the histogram. You say, hey, it's okay. The histogram's cool. There's no gaps or anything, but let's update that histogram. Okay, so when we update the histogram on it, we look at it, you say, well, it looks really good. I mean, you know, histograms, there's a few little chop marks and everything in there. Let's go back to the original image. All right, let's run that levels on there, which I'm just hitting Control-L. Let's bring up that 10. Let's get about 245. Let's just pull a little bit more of that mid-tone range up in there. Let's click OK, and then let's update that histogram on there. And you see these cones that are happening in the information here, where all of a sudden you start seeing these little combs coming in here, these little gaps in the data as it's coming in here. Now, a lot of these actions will run these levels, and they'll just keep running them on there. And they'll just keep running them over and over and over and over on it. Oh, my bad. I hit the levels on there. and they'll just keep running it, and they're making changes. Some of them make some really drastic changes. They'll really chop the blacks on there. They'll punch them back up in the midtones and all, and then they come back in. Then we look at a histogram. Then all of a sudden you start seeing the histogram starts looking even more different, where you start getting a lot of this combing going on here. And you look at the original that's happening here. You look at the levels on there, and then you say, well, geez, what's going on here? Well, we're in a 16-bit image, okay? And this is only a 8-bit histogram basically here. Let's go over here to an 8-bit image. Let's pull up on here the levels control on it. And let's pull that into about 245 there. Let's pull this up here to about 10. Again, they're doing that because they're saying you can't print anything below 10, which is pure black down in those areas on a printer. And then let's punch that back up a little bit. This is a real common setting that a lot of people use out there. We go back into the histogram itself. We update the histogram data. Now here's where it happens. That's that 8 and 16-bit deal there. You see all those little gaps in between those things? Okay, those gaps are missing data. And any kind of spike there is data that's been really added on top of it. So in all, this is what I'm talking about, data destruction. You run a lot of actions on there. They use a lot of steps that have levels or curves in there. You start getting data that's not, there's gaps in there. When you send that out to the screen or you send it out to a printer, that data has to be filled in. You can't put blank stuff up on the screen. It has to be filled in with something. So the software interpolates it. Whatever you're showing up on Photoshop, it'll show it on the screen. If you print it out, the printer is going to fill it in with what data it thinks needs to be there. So if you do this a lot, you may end up with maybe 1/10 of the data you started with, and you don't even realize it. And then you wonder why your images just don't have that punch, don't have that contrast, don't have that detail that those other guys have. That's one of the main reasons right here. Okay, we're going to kind of start winding things down here. We're going to head off here to this blank screen, which, you know, I can put anything up there and kind of show what's going on. But what we're really going to do here is we're going to get back over here into our PowerPoint presentation, and we're going to go into our next slide here. And what we want you guys to do is any kind of feedback you have, you want to go to imagenomic.com/support. Okay, it's just like if you file a support ticket. And just put the information in here, and then down at the bottom down there, when you get down the bottom and you have the form where you can fill the information in there, just put in whatever you want. Ask any question you want. You know, anything you want to put in there about this webinar, about anything we've talked about, or anything you got on your mind, do it. Let us know. I really want to hear from you guys. And then also that Imagenomic also offers for the educational industry out there, you know, shops that have a lot of shooters in them, that have a lot of workstations, you know, companies that use a lot of the software. There's breaks on the number of licenses that you can get. And there's also deals that you can get as well when you buy more than one plug-in together or variations of one plug-in together. A lot of times it's 50% is what you're getting it for. You can get them together. And so it's very high-quality stuff. So the amount of money, you know, people will say that's too much, $199 for a plug-in or whatever. When you think about it, the workflow and the issues and all the savings that you may make on it, if you can't get it back in a couple of 3 shoots, then maybe you ought to think about doing something else out there. So we're going to wind things down here now because we're kind of running up toward the end of the process here.